Okay, thank you for attending this webinar today. As you may have seen overnight, Microsoft sent emails for people that had showed interest in Microsoft Teams to a online webinar that will happen with Kurt Koenigsbauer on March 14th next week on Tuesday. So this is very good timing for myself and Mike to talk about Microsoft Teams and how it can help your organization from what we've been using internally at Hyperfish and what Mike's been doing with clients. So just to jump straight into it, my name is Jeremy Thake. I'm the VP of Product Technology here at Hyperfish. Um, I was at Microsoft for 3 years, so if you were involved in Office 365 development, you would have heard me on podcasts and Channel 9 videos for the last few years before I joined Hyperfish in November. And prior to that, I was actually SharePoint MVP for 5 years, based out of New York and Australia, and can be contacted on jeremythake.com and at jthake on Twitter. Mike, thanks for joining me on this webinar today.
No problem. And welcome, everyone. My name is Mike Maadarani. I am an Office 365 information architect. I have been an Office 365 MVP for the past 3 years. I've worked with SharePoint and Office 365 since V1, since SharePoint 2001. Been solely doing a lot of SharePoint on-premise, a lot of SharePoint Online, Office 365 solutions for the past few years right now. I can be reached at mike@maadarani.com or Twitter at mike_maadarani, one word.
Excellent. And so today we're going to be covering a few things, but I just wanted to point out that we had a few people asking about the fact that is this webinar recorded? Yep, the recording button is on, and this will be available on our Hyperfish YouTube channel at youtube.com/hyperfish. This webinar, we're really going to talk about what does Microsoft Teams bring to the table for your organization as an existing Office 365 customer. What does it mean when there are other chat-based tools such as Skype, Slack, Yammer, SharePoint even? And what are some of the gotchas that you might want to be aware of that are, out there on FAQs and so forth, but something that as you're making decisions about Microsoft Teams in your org, how that may be impacted when you're making decisions on how it'll be rolled out and who will take advantage and that aspect. So from a kind of jumping straight into it, one of the big things that we find where we've been doing a lot of research at Hyperfish is there's a great IDC case study that went and interviewed a bunch of different customers from around the globe. And the research they found was that it varied between 15 and 35% of knowledge workers' times on a day-to-day basis was spent trying to find information. One of the interesting things with that is that, unfortunately, out of that report, nearly 40% of corporate users found they couldn't find the information they were looking for to do their job on their intranets and document management systems and knowledge management systems. And what this meant is that the time that they burnt trying to find that information was actually, if you did a hypothetical organization of 1,000 employees, burning nearly $6 million a year in time that they're paying their employees to be working. And if they weren't burning that time trying to find the information and could find that information instantly or in a reasonable short period of time, that they'd actually be having an opportunity cost of nearly 15 million. So rather than burning that time looking for things, they could be doing things that would benefit the company, and that opportunity cost was significantly higher. And so this notion of knowledge management is really important to organizations. And it adds a lot of value to companies when technology can be used alongside kind of people to enhance that experience of discovering information in a timely manner. And so with Microsoft Teams, they understand that there is a lot of collaboration that happens both internally in an organization, but also externally in an organization. And some of the research that Microsoft's done has kind of gone to this belief that there's actually this jump that's happened where, as an individual within an organization, you've gone from working with maybe 2 teams within your org to maybe double that in the last 5 years. And this is really important and something that I witnessed when I was at Microsoft, where when I started my role, I was working with my direct immediate team. But over time, I got involved in lots of different projects, which meant that I was in a lot of different virtual teams that are cross-company, and I was having to work daily and in those kind of collaboration environments, both in-person meetings, online meetings, and even just in the general stream of things that go on. And so it's really important to understand that that isn't just people in your organization. At Microsoft, we work with a lot of vendors or external contractors that are brought in to help scale projects, and having to deal with those things and not have to really worry about the notion that they're external or that they're not on our internal network and having to communicate in that way. And that I was working with people that were in Oslo, in Norway, and various other parts of the world where sales teams were trying to sell Office 365, and having tools to help with that collaboration more so than just email was really, really important. I think the big thing that comes up with Microsoft Teams is this notion of this multi-generational workforce where the baby boomers are starting to kind of be not pushed aside, but moving along in the organization to make room for some of these new generations that are coming through that were born essentially with mobile phones in their hands, using things like Facebook and having LinkedIn profiles before their even career started, talking about what they're thinking of studying and what they want to try and achieve in their career, and also working with things like Facebook Messenger and Snapchat and Slack in their education spaces. And so Microsoft kind of introduced Microsoft Teams as a way to kind of appeal to the benefits of that generation, but also to try and encourage people that may be not familiar with that kind of real-time, high-velocity chat type world, and encourage them to come over and start seeing this technology and seeing how it can benefit that model of working that maybe they're not familiar with because they're so used to using email. And so with part of that, Microsoft knew that they had lots of different ways that collaboration can occur within their organization. And typically, and something I witnessed when I was at Microsoft, was that these products and technology tended to be quite siloed. Not just in terms of the experience that went on in the browser or in the app you had, and no real natural links to hop between one type of technology to another, but also physically and literally in person in Microsoft. I could go down to building 31 and 32 and talk to the Exchange team that look after mail and calendar. But then if I wanted to go to work, speak to the Skype team, I'd have to go to a completely different building, which is like a 10-minute walk. And much like then if I wanted to go and speak to someone about sites and content management, I'd have to walk down to building 34. And these guys are busy. They have their own priorities. They have their own kind of targets they're trying to reach on usage for their own products. And although they want to play nicely in Office 365, they do have a bias towards their own product. And so, unfortunately, this caused a lot of issues for us as users consuming Office 365 because you had to kind of jump between a lot of these different technologies, and it made it hard to remember. Well, hang on, I remember having this discussion about a particular product or technology, but I can't remember whether I was doing that in the enterprise social space or whether I was doing that in email, or maybe I was doing that via voice and video. And so where we're mapping those products, you can see now that there are lots of different technologies that we probably already use ourselves, whether it's SharePoint, Yammer, Skype, Outlook, and not just for mail, personal email, but groups in Outlook, which is the kind of, I call the distribution list on steroids, and then Microsoft Teams. And so one thing I wanted to clear up straight away, because it does add a lot of confusion, is when we talk about Office 365 groups, or you'll notice that Microsoft are now calling them connected groups, is that when you create a connected group, essentially it's going and provisioning each one of these technologies around this connected group, where you define membership once at that connected group level, and then you have access to all these different products and services for that particular project or for that particular division of your organization. And that's something that is a new kind of idea that people are kind of getting quite confused about. And I've written some blog posts on blog.hyperfish.com that kind of covers that in more detail. But I just wanted to make sure that we were clear that Microsoft Teams is another aspect of the Office 365 connected groups. Now, with that, as a Microsoft slide here, just to kind of highlight where they're thinking about this messaging, they're introducing Microsoft Teams, but they really are the undisputed leader in terms of enterprise mail and calendaring perspective versus things like Google and other competitors in that space. With voice and video, they have 100 million meetings a month. So most people understand that Skype is that leader. But what's interesting is things like Amazon Chime, which was announced a few weeks ago, is starting to kind of add to this connectivity space. And we also have, competition there from Google and GoToMeeting and a bunch of other places where voice and video meetings can be had. Now, I'm guessing a lot of you use SharePoint on a day-to-day basis, and something that is probably one of the biggest workloads in Office 365 outside of Exchange, with 190 million end users. And then obviously with Yammer being acquired by Microsoft a few years ago now, and kind of having to have that struggle of being integrated into Azure and then being integrated into Office 365 and then having to do the work to get into Office 365 connected groups has slowed down their innovation a bit, but it does play a big part as part of this overall collaboration and is an option certainly, which we'll talk about kind of when you would use that over some of these other things when you're doing collaboration. And so when Microsoft talk about Microsoft Teams and this notion of a chat-based workspace, essentially what they're saying is they understand those other workloads and services have different reaction times and priorities in how you would check that on a day-to-day basis. Internally at Hyperfish, we use Slack primarily because we are majority developers building our product, and we have a lot of technical integrations to various different developer tools that kind of ping and integrate with Slack in that level. But we are looking, once Microsoft Teams provides those integrations, to flip over to Microsoft Teams, primarily because it's another cost we don't have to worry about because we pay for Office 365 and Microsoft Teams is part of that payment. And so there's these 4 different pillars there of what Microsoft Teams means. So Mike, do you want to go through each of those 4 and explain kind of your take on what you feel Microsoft mean by each of these 4 pillars within Microsoft Teams?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jeremy. So as Jeremy had mentioned, Microsoft Teams is built from the ground up for high velocity teams as part of the Office 365 collaboration portfolio. So the product is what we call the Microsoft response to demand for a chat-based interaction tool. So when it comes to chatting with your team members within one single platform, Microsoft Teams provides a modern conversation experience, providing, for example, threaded conversations that are persistent. What that means, in other words, that the conversations that you have with Microsoft Teams become information assets that are saved and searchable via Microsoft Graph, for example. Microsoft Teams allows you to communicate in real time and keep everyone in the know at the same time. So you're working on a specific project, you're working with a team member, you go in and you want to chat with others. This is where you can go and collaborate and make sure that you are interacting all the time with your colleagues. So all team members can see and contribute to the chat team, see the chat history at any time, and you can recall past discussions and decisions. You also have the flexibility to create private chats for small group conversations with one or many people. And then if you want to take that conversation to be taken offline, you can go into a private chat. In addition to this, when someone mentions you to reply to a conversation that you're part of, so someone can mention you with the at your name or reply to a conversation that you are part of, you will automatically get notified. So that way you can stay on top of all the activities you have within that Microsoft Team channel. People might say that I use Skype for Business, for example, to chat with my colleagues. You can still do that, but you can also receive, if you want, Skype for Business chat messages on Microsoft Teams, so you have always one place for your team communications. For when you need to talk face-to-face, for example, you can also start a video call from Microsoft Teams chat, whether a team chat or a private chat, and it also can turn off the video if you want to do only an audio call. You can also join, for example, schedule Skype for Business meetings from Microsoft Teams as your one place for team communications. And yeah, one thing I forgot before we go to the next slide that you almost forgot to mention, that Microsoft Teams is available on all devices. So you can go through Microsoft Teams on Windows, you can install it on Mac, you can use iOS, Android, and of course Windows Phone and using the browser as well.
Yeah, I think, Mike, the big thing about that is I was quite surprised in a preview how robust those apps are across the different platforms. I think some of the technology choices they made that, this isn't your typical, let's just push a mobile app out there for the sake of a mobile app.
Exactly, yeah. And we first downloaded the app when they first announced it internally, and I was really surprised that it worked really well on my. First, I had a Windows phone, and before I switched to my iOS, and it worked perfectly well. So when it comes to working with other people, this is basically your place for collaboration. Not long only is Microsoft Teams the place for your team and chat communications, it is also a hub for your team's collaboration. In a single place, you can find the chat conversation with your teams. You can find, for example, your files, your team members, and we'll go through the demo, and you can add a lot of tools that you can have in just one place in one application. So because Microsoft Teams is integrated with Office 365, teams have quick access to the information they need, whether they are files shared through SharePoint, in OneNote, in Excel, PowerPoint, you name it, in PDFs, or any other documents that can be shared and opened right in the app. Because Microsoft Teams was built leveraging the full capability of Microsoft Graph, teams or workgroups have also the ability to share data, intelligence, and insight anywhere within Office 365. Searching is always a big piece, so it is also integrated with Microsoft Teams. So if you can't find immediately what you're looking for, you can search in Microsoft Teams for any information that is stored within your team, the Microsoft team, and within your channel. You can search for people, you can search for files, chats, links, whatever you have stored in the actual Microsoft Teams. You can move easily between multiple Microsoft Teams, so it's easy to see what's going on across the team, across the channel, across the chat. You can have multiple teams that you're actually part of, so it's really easy to go back and forth within one specific application. From a customization perspective, customizing a tool to your needs, what I think it's one of the most important requirements for any tool in this day and age. All customizations in Microsoft Teams are unique, so you can customize and add, remove, change things, whatever you need to do within your own Microsoft Teams, and it can be within the organization, within the actual team level. It doesn't really matter where you want to work. You can definitely have the flexibility to create, for example, workspace that fits your team needs. You can add new tabs to channel for quick access. To frequently use documents, you can have a new tab in Microsoft Teams to access cloud services like PowerPoint and Planner. And also, Microsoft is now working with partners like Zendesk, Asana, Intercom, and many other third-party integration tools are coming up for developers that will allow you to actually connect other tools and other services into Microsoft Teams. As of today, we have about or more than 70 Office 365 connectors for services like Twitter, Dynamic CRM, VSTS, GitHub, whatever you want. You can all connect to it, and then you can add them to your tab, and all the rich notifications will be sent right into your channel. So that way, you can have real-time updates, breaking news, any actions, notification actions that can show up within your Microsoft team. Security is a big subject for all of us, and since Microsoft Teams is built within the Office 365 groups, and because Office 365 has strong commitment around security, compliance, and privacy and transparency, Microsoft will use the same principles to deliver an enterprise-grade platform. Providing advanced security and compliance capabilities through the Office 365 platform means that the data is encrypted in transit and at rest as well. And the solution meets the compliance standards such as ISO 27001, 27018, SOC 1 and 2, HIPAA, and many more, EU model clauses as well. So it meets all those compliance and standards. The Microsoft Teams also protects team data securely using strong security measures, including, for example, two-factor authentications, hard passwords, and access policy. So your data is always encrypted, whatever it is in chat, notes, or files. And as part of Office 365, Microsoft Teams is supported through Microsoft's global network of data centers, which the company has maintained a transparent operational model with no standard access to customer data. What does that mean? It is at the end of the day, it is your data, you own it, and you control it. Microsoft does not mine customer data for advertising purposes, for example, and they safeguard customer data with strong contractual commitments. In keeping with the commitment, I think my opinion is to provide customers the utmost transparency. Customers can see the uptime, for example, the location of the data, detailed report on how Office 365 controls the map to the security and privacy and all the compliance and risk management that comes along with it. So from a security perspective, we're pretty much protected, and we don't have to worry about data leaks or Microsoft really keeping a tab on our data.
Yeah, I think the big benefit there as well, Mike, is that, if you've already gone through that process of evaluating Office 365 and you've used it and you've gone through all the checks and balances to make sure that the security policies meet the requirements of your organization, there's no need to go through that again in selecting Microsoft Teams for your chat-based workspaces. Whereas if you picked a competitor like Slack and some of the other chat-based workspaces out there, you'd have to go through that due diligence again. And the nice thing is that if there's users already in Office 365, they get that single sign-on experience. They get the integration with all those products through those connected groups. So there is a huge upside to Microsoft Teams from that aspect over using something like Slack, where if you want file support, you really need to go use Dropbox or Box as part of that, and you start kind of building this best of breed thing in your organization where there is integration for sure, but it's not as tight as where Office 365 will get to with Microsoft Teams.
Exactly, and like you said, you don't have to go through the checks and balances. If you're already on Office 365, you've gone through the security checks and everything else, and you're set up, just start using it. It's much easier than using any other tool out there.
So do you want to show a quick demo of this, and then we can get into the short curlies of some of the questions that I know will get asked, and definitely address some of the questions that maybe we hadn't thought of as well.
Absolutely. So can you see my screen right now?
Yeah, I can see it. Yep.
Perfect. So welcome to the Microsoft team. What I'm running here is my Windows app on my Surface. This is what it looks like. We have already created, Jeremy and I created a webinar team. Then we can go and chat, collaborate, and share documents if you like. So, for example, right now, Megan sent me a note asking me how the demo is going. I have two options. I can either reply back. Replying back to her will send her a notification right away that I can say the demo is going great, good attendance. By doing so, I have sent a reply back to Megan, and Megan will automatically get an actual notification that I have done a reply back. You can add, awesome, here you go, killing it. You can add GIFs and emojis. We'll go through some of the features with the chat-based system. I can attach a document, for example. If I click on, I want to send a file through the channel, I can click a document, and what it does, similar to all the actual Office 365 tools, I can go into the OneDrive and select something that I can send Megan a document that will be able to actually share with her, and it will add it to the actual files tab that we have in place.
And the one nice thing about that is that it's a reference to the document and not an attachment that then becomes another version of that document. So it really does encourage this notion of a single source of the truth for the way that you use documents in OneDrive and SharePoint. And also this notion that OneDrive location is actually part of the team. So when you share a document from there, everyone that's in that team has access to that OneDrive for business location. And therefore you don't have to worry about the security of it because it's already kind of, that document's going to have that level of lockdown.
Exactly. So I'm going to select this PowerPoint presentation. I will send it to Megan, And while waiting on uploading it, we can go and check other features. As you can see here, notifications on the right-hand side of the chat. It's a mention, it's the @ sign, which means it's direct private chat between Megan and I. The actual Q3 Sales Europe PowerPoint has been uploaded. I can say, I just sent you the PPTX, please review and approve. Going on the left-hand side, if you look at the activity, for example, it shows me all the activity that's happening within the Microsoft Teams. So you can see this is where all myself, I can see the private chat, and I can see any public chat within the Teams. The chat tab is very similar. I have a chat with Megan. I can create another chat if I want to with a different person. Coming back to the Teams tab here, as you can notice, we have the webinar on the top left is basically the chat name, the Microsoft Teams name. The other one is general, is the actual channel. We can have multiple channels added to the actual team. So we have the general one, that is a lunchroom channel. I can create a new channel. So let's say, and I want to add a channel here. I can say road trip to Ignite. I can add it here, and people will have access to it. So from there, I can definitely have conversations and have information related to that channel only. From a general, what we call it, the hub of collaboration, when I am in a channel, I have multiple tabs on top. I have a conversation tab. I've been chatting with Megan for quite a while here. I have the files tab. This is automatically what it does. It will automatically create, every time I create a channel, it will automatically create the files tab for me. This is where I can go and upload all the documents and get a link, share it, blah blah blah. Whatever I added right now to Megan, it showed up automatically in the files. That's the Q3 Sales Europe. And just to keep to note that for most of you probably are SharePoint users, the files are stored in a SharePoint team site. So I have the option to actually open the document from the Microsoft Teams or from SharePoint. So clicking on it will automatically launch my Office 365 SharePoint Online team site. The next one, for example, when we started collaborating together on this webinar, we started adding a few tabs. Planner is one of them that we've added. So clicking on it will take a few seconds to open the planner. So if you are working on a specific project, you can add activities, you can add tasks here. So it's all the Office 365 Planner is in this place. We've added the Hyperfish active, the YouTube channel here for Hyperfish. You can add a different document library. So let's go through that. It's really simple. You can click on the plus sign here to add a tab. It will give you all this information out of the box or what you want to add. So we've got the Excel, the Office documents, we got OneNote, PDF, we can have Power BI, YouTube, team services, websites. So all I have to do, let's go and add another SharePoint site. And it will automatically load what relevant sites are for me. I have picked previously the sales and marketing. I'm going to go and upload or share a document center. So I click on the document center link and click on next. It will automatically load all the document libraries within that document center team site. Click on next, select the documents, and I say give it a tab name, document center, and save it. It is as easy as that to share information within one specific place. So here you go. This is all the document center, documents within that document library that I have. Again, I can get a link, I can upload, I can create new exactly like I'm using SharePoint team sites. I can definitely go and collaborate with my team within Microsoft Teams rather than going and opening or using multiple tools. One is SharePoint Online or Planner, or I have to attach external links. It's all done in one place.
And the get link button there would be the way that you would, if you selected the document, did that, you then paste that into your chat to then reference that document. I know they've got smarter things coming on how you can quickly do that without jumping over to this tab to get it, but that's how you would do those reference links. One thing to bear in mind there is when you add that document center tab, that's not automatically making sure everyone in the team that's a member has access to that document center. So you would have to manage that somehow. And the best way to do that is every Microsoft team you create is a connected group under the covers, which means it's an Active Directory security group. As you add and remove members from that team, it's adding and removing users from the security group in AD, which means you could go and add that security group to the permissions of that document center in SharePoint. The reason you would do that is maybe you want that document center promoted as a tab in, like the 40 teams you have that you've decided to create, to encourage that everyone puts their documents in there, as opposed to maybe the files location inside the individual teams. It really does depend on where you want to place those things. And again, that comes down to that choice aspect inside of, how you decide to slice and dice this.
Exactly. Couple of things before we move on. Meetings, you also have access to your team calendar. You can schedule a meeting. Files are basically your Microsoft Teams files here, your OneDrive. This is basically a way for you to access the information from any tab you want or from anywhere within the Microsoft Teams.
So one other thing to note there is some of the user interface, I think, still needs a little bit of work, where Mike just attached that Q3 sales Europe.ppx. That didn't actually send that to me. You can see there's the reply wording, and in the corner there's like that little, what looks like a paper airplane send button. It's not that obvious that didn't send. And that's one thing that I know they've had feedback from on their user voice channel, that it doesn't, and when you're clicking back and forth, it still looks like it's there, but there's that blinky little cursor now that shows that if I go and click that envelope in the bottom right, that'll actually post that, and then Megan, who I'm in as, would actually see that inside that chat. So there are a few little kind of things they're still working on the best user interfaces for. So with that, I hope that's give you a good idea about some of the features. And if you're more interested in a deeper demo, I'd really encourage you to kind of go and play with this yourself. And so what we wanted to cover now was spend a bit of time actually going through how you can get started. But one of the big questions that we had is where it fits. And so we talked a little bit about the default Microsoft slider, the connected group, with all the different technologies you can use for collaboration. And there's an interesting blog post where they introduce Teams on blogs.office.com. And part of that there is that they explained where they think things fit. So, for instance, they think that SharePoint fits more in providing an intranet capability and a content management capability. And what they mean by content management is advanced document management in my eyes. And there was already a question by Conor Cole here that asked about this notion of metadata for documents. When you create a team, you get a Files tab, which is using OneDrive for Business. OneDrive for Business, you get your own personal OneDrive for Business, but for every connected group, you also get a OneDrive for Business container or area that you can use. Now, that's basic file support. What you saw when Mike added the document center there is that's actually adding a SharePoint document library, which is not basic file support. It's actually more advanced, and you can do things like metadata and various advanced views and so forth, and content types and those things that you can't do in a OneDrive for Business basic file system. And so you'd have to make that decision of, do I use SharePoint and bolt that in as a tab in Teams to get more advanced document management, or do I stick with the basic file support that I get OneDrive for Business? Now I can do sync down to my local file system in both now with OneDrive, both on a PC and a Mac. I use a Mac and it's been a great client to use. They say for Yammer that basically they're talking about that as a social network for work. And the key thing here, and we'll get to this with some of the limitations or boundaries of Teams, is that they see it as a cross-company way to have discussions. So they see Microsoft Teams more as a way of collaborating in smaller groups for projects. But if you've got questions about how the company is run or philosophies of the company or asking general questions around the strategy of the company and so forth, you would be posting those types of questions in Yammer and not in individual teams, because likely the teams are going to be more project or divisional based and not all company wide. And that's the division they have with Yammer right now. Now, I've written a blog post on blog.hyperfish.com that goes into a little bit of detail on kind of this level and my concerns around this notion that I feel like Yammer's fit right now. Once Teams get some of its boundaries and limitations broaden, which I'll talk about in a moment, that Yammer needs to find its new place, because Teams can very easily become that way of posting and asking questions across company by creating a Microsoft team that all of the company is in. Right now, you can't do that unless your company is extremely small. Now, they say that Skype for Business is more for real-time voice, video, and conferencing. It is nice that Microsoft integrates that directly into my team, so I can call those, make a call to my team, or have a screen sharing outside of my team with Skype for Business that I can't do in Teams, or I'll talk about in a moment. And then this notion of Office 365 groups is that connected group. That is the one container that will provision each one of these products and give you a security group membership across all of them. But I think the mistake that Microsoft has been making with this notion of Office 365 groups and connected groups is that there is a functionality called Groups in Outlook, which is the distribution list capability that now is actually in the fast ring of Mac Outlook, but it's been in Windows Outlook for a long time and obviously has mobile apps as well, is that you can use emails with a distribution list to communicate just like people are familiar with emails, but rather than it just being available to people that are on the 2 and CC and BCC line, is that it gets stored in a particular location in Exchange and is available if you're a member of that connected group and you access that the DLs within groups in Outlook. And so you've got to make sure you understand the difference between what they're calling an Office 365 group or a connected group, and then this notion of groups in Outlook, which is really those distribution lists and the email way of chatting. Now, one thing, the question came up as well was, if I create a Microsoft team, because I'm creating a connected group, I get Yammer, I get Skype, I get SharePoint, team site. I also get a group in Outlook. And the question was, can I continue to do emails in a distribution list way and store those as part of the team? Well, the answer is yes. But for now, there's no easy way from the Teams interface to see the group in Outlook email conversations that are going on. You can add a tab and have the deep link in the OA, the Outlook web browser interface for the group in Outlook that's there, and pin that in. But there's nothing native that does that right now. But I assume they'll get to it. And you can do the same with Yammer. I can pin a tab in Teams to see the Yammer group that's part of the connected group that was provisioned as part of asking for this new team. So it's a little bit confusing. Now, there are plenty of ways that this can be used within organizations, and you'll see here that this is more of a divisional view of how this can work. Internally, for instance, from a high-velocity teams perspective, with Slack that we use right now, where we're transitioning over to Microsoft Teams for sales and marketing and so forth, is we do lots of different kind of tasks that may have been done in email before. And the biggest thing I found from moving from Microsoft to Hyperfish is that we are a smaller company, so there's going to be less communications in general between the amount of employees. But I barely get emails from anybody internal. Every bit of communication is either in person or is actually done via the high velocity chat based platform, which we're currently Slack, but we will move to Teams. And that is a big transitional change. And I believe that email is by no means dead, but I think that there will be a preference and a shift there, that certain tasks and way we collaborate will move out of email, and some things will just be easier to do in that chat-based workspace. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of this show that we've been in preview now since November of 2016, and it was a very impressive preview. They're going to make it genuinely available on March 14th, and there's a link there, a buffer link that will share these slides and so forth, but you can write that down now. To register for the webinar that happens next week, and it's Kurt Koenigsberg, who's my old CVP when I was at Microsoft. He'll be presenting on everything to do with Microsoft Teams, so I'd highly recommend you check that out. But they've already said that they're immediately going to start rolling out new features straight after GA for other bits and pieces. So with that, Mike, how do people get started? Because I noticed in there was a question around, like, I don't see Microsoft Teams in my Office 365 environment.
So if you are a tenant admin on your Office 365, all you have to do, as you can see on the screen, you go into Settings, Service and Add-ins, and you scroll down, you'll see Microsoft Teams. Automatically, it is enabled for you. It should be enabled for you. If it's not, go in and check why it's not. So when clicking on the Microsoft Teams, it will open up another window for you that will allow you to granularly control different settings on the Microsoft team. So if you go into the next slide, basically, once you click on that Microsoft Teams in your tenant admin service and add-ins, it will allow you to granularly basically select what you want to turn on and off, from the general tab, channels to the team channels, if you want to do calls and meetings, messaging. So you have a lot of granularity in terms of what you can turn on and off. It's not all or nothing. So you have the option to choose if you want to do the calls only within Skype for Business. You can go ahead and turn that off if you want to.
Yeah, and so that really kind of gets you started. And so some of the things that kind of, oh, sorry, I've just clicked on that. Some of the things that are kind of might be gotchas. There's an FAQ for Microsoft Teams, which I assume is going to get an update before the GA next Tuesday. So I've put that Buffly link there so you can go and check that out. But this comes back to this notion of Yammer being a company-wide area, whereas Microsoft Teams is kind of limited to 600 members within a Microsoft team. And so what that means is that if I try to add an extra one over 600, it will actually block you from doing that. Now, this is an interesting limit because essentially the security group that is used for Teams is actually the connected group, which is an Active Directory group. And an Active Directory group does not have a limitation of 600 members. So I would assume that this is a safe limit right now for them from an infrastructure perspective of how they're running Teams. And I would expect that number to go up. And this is one of the things that I feel like if that number went high enough that it would be incorporate the ability for you to have a team that would have all of your users in it, it starts to kind of bear that, well, hang on, I can create messages in Teams, I can reply to messages in Teams, I can like messages in Teams, I can search for messages in Teams, I can tag things in Teams. What does Yammer give me that Teams doesn't? And so that's kind of that question I've had, and not really gotten a straight answer on that from anyone at Microsoft just yet. So it'd be interesting to see if they change the way they delineate Yammer and Teams once that member limit goes up. Teams is part of Office 365 e-plans. And so if you're already on an e-plan, this is available based on those instructions Mike said. But what's interesting is if you have a meeting that you launch in Skype, you currently are limited to 80 people. So this isn't a great way if you've got a team of 600 and you want to jump on a call with all 600 people for a broadcast for that particular project. You are going to be limited to 80 people right now. Now, again, that is not a limitation of Skype for Business. So I imagine that number will crawl up after they've been in GA for a while and they're comfortable. They currently support 19 languages, which is a bunch of regions and countries that are inclusive, but they have already stated that number will go up after GA2. So they're just things to watch out for depending on what regions you're working with and how big your teams are going to be. Now, there are some rooms for improvement, and I've picked on 3 here because these are the ones that we hear the most about. The first one being the basic files experience. When I create a Microsoft team, the Files tab is linked to the OneDrive for Business area container that is part of the connected group. Now, OneDrive for Business is a kind of a watered down basic version of what a SharePoint document library is. So there are certain features like metadata that aren't available. I feel like what will happen is that most people will want to remove that Files tab and move to SharePoint document libraries and add that tab there. And you get a SharePoint site when you create a team because it's creating an underlying connected group, which means it's provisioning all those other services as well. And so that's something that I feel like might be something they need to look at to see the telemetry on how many people are using the OneDrive basic file system versus using a SharePoint document library that you can add as an additional tab. The e-discovery story is still a little weak. It isn't included in the Security and Compliance Center if you're familiar with e-discovery right now. This may change before general availability. I have noticed that in the Microsoft Graph now that in the messages, in the beta endpoint, the messages, not only do you get emails coming through on that endpoint now in the Microsoft Graph, but you also get conversations that happen in Microsoft Teams, which is an interesting decision to make. It'll be to see, I'm guessing they've done that so that the e-discovery tools can start picking those things up. And then the other thing, which we didn't have time to go into too much detail, but bots can be added to channels, or you can talk to a bot directly in a chat window. Now, the benefit of that is things like the ability to kind of add, and the one I used yesterday was a kayak bot, where I can use Kayak to search for flights. And rather than me go and do all that research on my own, I can ask the Kayak bot, what flights exist between Seattle and New York for April 14th? And the Kayak bot will respond in that channel. That immediately means everyone that has access to that team channel can then see those results, and then we can have a discussion about which flight we like. So I kind of like the idea of bots for kind of being part of that conversation and being able to add information from other sources. Now, in addition to that, there's some things that I feel are majorly missing from Teams. And I'm sure there are a few of these things that will come either at GA and be a big surprise, or will come shortly after. And the first one is external users. The external users aspect essentially is that right now you can only add users to a team that have an Office 365 user account within your Office 365 tenant. Now, SharePoint supports external users, and so does connected groups. And so I don't see this being something that is an issue for too long, but just something to bear in mind at GA. The other thing is these aren't available in the education tenants or the government tenants, but I imagine again that that's something that they're just working on engineering wise. The big question I keep getting, and the question I had was, now I have Microsoft Teams and I also have Skype for Business apps running on my phone and my Mac and my Windows machines. Why do I need that? Well, the big thing is although Skype is supported in Microsoft Teams, if you're a heavy user of PSTN functionality, i.e. Having your own phone lines for each individual, you'll never be able to, for now, stop using Skype for Business because Teams doesn't support that, which is interesting because it's come from the same engineering group. You also cannot record audio or video meetings that are spun up from a Microsoft team. And from an e-discovery perspective, there is no notion of a soft delete, like a recycle bin. So for instance, if I deleted a team, it's gone. There's no way for me to recover that information. So it's going to be something I think there'll be a lot of concern around. And I'd mentioned before that there is no way right now for me to use the Security and Compliance Center to go discover information that's occurring in Microsoft Teams and show messages and conversations that are happening in that way. Now, there are some more minor ones which I think I'll highlight here, which is that there is no notion of a private channel. Every channel within a team bears the same security as the overarching team. Now, this might not seem a problem, but imagine that you've got a sales team where you might have an executive team within it. You can't just create a channel for that exec team and manage who's in that channel. You'd have to go and create a completely new Microsoft team, which might not be a bad thing, but it might be a little bit of overkill. It's something that Slack provides, and so I imagine that Microsoft will get pressure to do that anyway. Permalinks that allow me to reference conversations going on maybe in another Microsoft team or another channel, you can't do that right now. So I can't have a hyperlink that deep links me in. And one of the big gotchas where we added the YouTube video from Hyperfish to a tab, unfortunately I can't go and add a SharePoint page as a tab inside of Teams. which I think they'll get to. And with the new SharePoint framework and the fancy new web parts that you're able to add to a modern page, I can really see that maybe a SharePoint page could be the home page to Microsoft Teams to give you a bit more of a dashboard view rather than immediately leading people into the conversations view. As Mike mentioned earlier, the admin controls can be fairly limited, and also the UI extensibility. Yes, you can add a tab, and yes, you can create a bot and inject that into a team, but that's really as far as you can go now. You can't have a dashboard homepage like a SharePoint page and add your Microsoft Team web parts to it and add your groups in Outlook email conversations to it. You're really going to be clicking around your tabs from a UI extensibility. And one of the other big things that we've seen that is a feature of connected groups is there is no naming restriction. So I can go and create a Microsoft team and call it what I like. There is no kind of way my organization to kind of define what that would be. So Mike, what would you recommend of what we do next? I know we're a little bit over time, but then we'll take questions and people can decide to stay on if they choose.
Definitely. I definitely suggest to go and download Microsoft Teams, start playing with it. The URL is teams.microsoft.com/download, I think. If you want to go ahead and download it, start playing with it, start creating your teams, your channels, experience it. It's great. I've been using it for the past 3-4 months. I love it. There's a few blogs we have on the screen right now. What's the difference between, for example, Teams or versus Group or Yammer or SharePoint? There's a lot of YouTube videos. You can go to my blog. I have a brief blog article about it. So yes, go ahead and read about it, download it, and start playing with it.
Yeah, and so just to answer some of these questions that we're getting, do any of you know the status on Teams for education or government? No, unfortunately, there's been nothing defined publicly by Microsoft in that case. It would definitely be something I'd encourage you to ask as part of the announcement in the webinar they're doing on next Tuesday. I'm personally quite interested because I feel like Teams is a great thing for an education customer to use for sure with their students in classrooms and for various different other ways of communicating. It says, why does the schedule meeting feature not show your availability of invitees, and worse, it still invites the whole team even though you may have only selected 1 or 2 people? Yeah, so there is a user voice page for Microsoft Teams that if you click on the question mark in the top right, it has our hyperlink off to. That is already in there, I've noticed, and it's got quite a few votes. There is going to be this issue with scheduling meetings where you're going to end up, if you're not at work that day or maybe you're locked in meetings all day, that you're going to have a bunch of email invites for meetings that you didn't attend that people try to do. And I think, there's this kind of one or the other where maybe it should only reach out to the people that are available in Teams and Skype for Business and ask them whether they want to join this immediate call or not. That's going to be quite interesting to see how that functionality pans out. And I noticed Ryan Stone mentioned that the limit for membership was increased to $9.99. I did see that. I was going by the FAQ numbers, assuming that was correct. So I guess they need to update their FAQ. But thanks for that, Ryan. I did remember seeing it, but I couldn't remember where I'd seen that announced. And yeah, unfortunately with the EDU stuff, that's just the nature of where things are. So with that, I just wonder with anyone else, any other questions? If not, please check out both myself and Mike's blogs with blog.hyperfish.com and Mike Maadarani. And definitely encourage you to keep an eye on YouTube. We've got some videos that will be coming out that goes into a lot more detail and more kind of frequent updates than what we can do in a webinar. I do have a 6-part series, as mentioned in that What's Next there, for Teams versus Groups versus Yammer. One other thing before I finish, as just from a Hyperfish perspective, if you're not aware, Hyperfish is about helping you complete your directory in Active Directory. And one of the things we allow you to do for free is run a free analyzer. So if you go to app.hyperfish.com right now, you can sign in with your Office 365 credentials, or you can download our quick little tool and connect to your Active Directory on-prem, and we'll provide you a free report as a PDF that'll show you the health of your Active Directory. It'll start to show you how many of your users have profile photos and how many have managers and reports, so that if you're using Teams and you want to see beautiful photos of all your employees rather than blank squares, you'll get a good indication of how far down that path you actually are. It'll also do things like the Who bot, which I'm hoping they'll demo on Tuesday because it's still not available in the preview, where I can start asking questions around, who are the people in marketing, and it will go and list those things for me in the Microsoft team. Now, for that to do that, it's going to need your department attribute to be populated inside of Active Directory. So there's a lot of aspects of Teams that just won't work without your Active Directory being healthy. So I'd encourage you to go run this analyzer to see how healthy your environment is, and then you could look at evaluating Hyperfish, where we'll actually proactively reach out to those users that we've analyzed and saw that they don't have complete information, and encourage them to update their information through our very easy to use bots or our profile update forms. So with that, Mike, thank you very much for joining me on the webinar today. We'll get this recording out shortly, and you guys have a good day.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Jeremy.